Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 14 team, the Houston Texans, coming in real strong here. Really like this team, really like this roster, love the coaching staff, which we'll get to, usually right there at the top, but a great group. They looking to rebuild the running game after failing with that Nick Chubb-Joe Mixon combination they were looking for. Woody Marks did fine. We'll get to him now being back in his more appropriate role, probably as a backup to the newly acquired David Montgomery. They got Nico Collins, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, hopefully a healthy Tank Dell. It's looking promising. It's looking promising after that horrific knee injury. He would be a huge X factor in how good this weapons group can be for the quarterback, CJ Stroud, who's had his struggles since his rookie year. He came in strong in his rookie year, surprised some people, mostly me, who didn't have him ranked that high, who thought he was a bit of a bust coming out of Ohio State. And then he sort of regressed a little, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that conversation. And, you know, the offensive line is controversially built here. They got rid of Laramie Tunsil, and why would you do that? I don't understand. Added some veteran pieces here and there. The real star of this team is the defensive side. Probably, if not the best edge pairing in the whole league. Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter, who we will get to in their assessment. A really nice, flexible, versatile interior defensive line to complement. Linebacking group that works right into Demeco Ryans' wheelhouse. And then that defensive back room, which I cannot wait to get to that. I cannot wait to talk about Stingley, Lassiter, and Pitre. They even added some pieces into that secondary. I can't wait for that. It's going to be so much fun to see them play football as a pass defense with that edge rush and with that secondary. But we're going to start with the coaching staff here, as we always do. Demeco Ryans comes in. He's my 13th ranked head coach. He's had a really good start to his coaching tenure here in Houston. I think he's really come and met expectations, exceeded them almost immediately. I think he's done a great job maintaining this team. You know, last year they had a rough start to the season. I think people started to kind of point the fingers a bit, you know, mostly at the offensive side. But I think Demeco Ryans had a really well-established culture mindset for this team that he initiated immediately upon arriving here. And he just kind of stayed the course culture-wise, found some of the deficiencies that were existing in the team. You know, I think they got to 3-5 before their bye week, and then just took off and went on a tear, I think they won out the whole season, secured another playoff berth. They just missed out on the division because Jacksonville did whatever that was that Jacksonville did last year, coming out of nowhere. But the one constant that they had from Demeco Ryans is what he was really brought here to do, and that's to establish an elite level defense. And between him and Matt Burke, they get the tier 1 defensive coaching. Fielded one of the most premier units last year, if not the best unit last year. I think you can argue that maybe they were the best unit last year, just because of how up and down that offense was for much of the season. You got the best so far out of Will Anderson, who established himself as probably the number 2 edge rusher in the whole league behind Myles Garrett. And if Myles Garrett doesn't break the record the way he does last year, I think Will Anderson gets a lot more consideration for being the best edge rusher in the league. They're two very different players. We'll get to him later on. His rushing partner, Danielle Hunter, who is every bit a number 1 edge rusher as well. What a dominant performance those two guys put on. You know, they schemed it up so well for those two guys to really perform. Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter played great there on the back end with Jalen Pitre. The pass defense in general is just so well coached. They're so well put together. You know, the 4-2-5 base formation where they have that Jalen Pitre running around out there with the 2 outside corners. You get that downhill linebacker play. They lost Christian Harris, but, you know, Azeez Al-Shaair is just such a force when it comes to that. He fits the system really well. He's not like the best linebacker. He's not Fred Warner or anything by any means, but he fits the system really well. They work the versatile matchups. So you have Stingley, you have Lassiter, and though Stingley is up there as like a top 3, top 4 cornerback in the entire league, when you have somebody the quality of Lassiter, you're able to work matchups a lot better, play into your favor, where someone like Lassiter might match up better against a team's number 1 receiver. It's rare, but when you have that level of talent at your disposal, it's just invaluable. And going back to the edge group, the wide spacing that they have, that wide 9 style that they'll invoke sometimes. A lot of 4-man pressure is what we expect here, but that's why you have these 2 guys just tearing off the edge. I would have maybe liked to see Demeco Ryans push to add a more legitimate number 3. We'll get to the depth on this defensive line a bit. You do get to run these guys into the ground a lot, and it does help with being as turnover focused as they are. That aggressive front 4 pass rush, then getting the turnovers, forcing the quarterback to throw the ball quickly, maybe disguising things, but being just relentlessly physical, and then countering that as well with a very disciplined run game. They're not going to blow you away with their run defense by any means, but they're so strong in the pass rush, and it leads to a very disciplined run defense up the middle. And we'll get to the rotation that they're going to have up on the interior. But when you have Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter getting first and second team All-Pros, and Derek Stingley getting, I think it was his first All-Pro distinguishment, it was just the disruption that this defense had kept them alive through most of the season. And then you kind of get over here with Nick Calley's offense, and I give Nick Calley a tier 3. I think that people might have been a little hard on him, transitioning into this role, taking over for Bobby Slowick, because there was flashes from him. He likes that advanced high tempo offense, wants to focus on the run game. I think that having Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb on the roster last year and not really being able to use them really hurt this group. And then Woody Marks got thrust into the starting running back role, and it was pretty much his running back room, and the run blocking wasn't all that great. So you bring in David Montgomery, who just came off of probably the best 1-2 tandem at running back in the entire league in Detroit, and you run that gap scheme with them. And that's going to help you stay ahead of schedule, right? And that's the key, I think, to this offense when you have this high-powered defense, is you want to stay ahead of schedule. You want to be less than second. When you're on second down, you want it to be 6 or less. You want to get that 4 yards a carry minimum. And I think you can get that with the combination of these 2 backs, because I think that neither one is really fit at this point in time in their careers, or for Woody Marks in terms of his overall talent and ceiling, to be like this true bell cow running back, the way you'll see from like a Derrick Henry, for example. But I think using them both, splitting the carries, or running back by committee, running back by duo strategy will work out really well for them. Also using multiple tight ends, bringing in extra O linemen to help with that as well, get the max protection. And then using the RPOs, you get Tank Dell's back now. You work him in with Jalen Knoll and Jalen Higgins. And then you got Nico Collins there on the outside. You can hit the rollout play action, but you need to be able to use the play action. You need to be able to have these running backs at your disposal. Because as good as CJ Stroud is, and we'll get to it, he has had moments of brilliance in his career and throughout the year, but he just battled inconsistency in himself, inconsistency in the offensive line, which we'll get to. They took a huge step back on the offensive line last year, which I think hurt Nick Calley's ability right out the gate while they were trying to sort out what that offensive line was going to look like without Laramie Tunsil. And Woody Marks did get better throughout the year, and it did help with their win streak, but this offense was incredibly reliant on what this defense was producing, and I think they kind of want to get away from that. That first year where they had CJ Stroud as a rookie quarterback, that was such a great offensive year. It was the explosion of Nico Collins onto the scene. Everything was really clicking at that point in time, and I think Demeco Ryans needs to find a way to harness the offense and harness his offensive coaches like Nick Cali, for example, and get them back to that. Get them back on track. Find out what worked that first year that made CJ Stroud just burst onto the scene. People were talking about him like he was a top 10 quarterback. And I'm not sure people are talking about him in that vein right now. And you want to see them get past what they did. You know, it's not just good enough anymore that they're making the playoffs. I think the expectations are that they're going to be a winning franchise in January. And, you know, you beat the living crap out of the Steelers, which Pittsburgh was what they were, and then you kind of run into a team that is actually worth something, and you kind of blow it. 5 turnovers, 4 interceptions. It just wasn't a great performance against New England at all. So I don't know if they can say last year was a disappointment. I think it was a disappointment in terms of offensive production and offensive scheme and offensive consistency. And I know Demeco Ryans is not a offensive coach, but I've said this before about a lot of these coaches. It doesn't matter what their preference is or what they were doing before they got the head coaching job. When you become the head coach, both sides of the ball are your responsibility. The special teams is your responsibility. If they are not doing well, then you have to pivot, and your pivot has to be in the right direction. And if it isn't, then it's your fault. And I think that's why Demeco Ryans, for me, doesn't fall in the top 10. I think if the offense provided remotely close to a consistent performance last season, then he probably would have been listed as a top 10 coach. But he did that first half of the year, you know, he didn't have the train on the tracks the way that you're supposed to, especially when you're a team that has the expectations that they have. So he does suffer in a grade to that to some degree. I couldn't punish him completely, but also you mix in there the fact that you had so many great coaching performances last year that he does kind of have to take a bit of a back seat to at least 12 of these other coaches. Some of them we've already covered. But I think that there's a huge, huge possibility here for the team. I don't dislike Nick Cali, again, as an offensive coach. I think what they did late in the year was fantastic. So you want to build on that. And hopefully they've gotten the roster to build on that. And it all really relies on what you can get out of CJ Stroud at the end of the day. Make sure to subscribe to this video so you don't miss any of the future videos that are posted here. Make sure that this channel is right there for you guys. Hit that subscribe button right there in the little video section or whatever where my logo is, and hit that thumbs up even if you disagree with what I've been saying. And now you might just start disagreeing significantly, because we're about to get to the actual roster assessment, the roster grades, the position groups, starting with the quarterback position. And CJ Stroud comes in for me as 14th to 15th in terms of overall quarterback. An 84 grade. Sort of the same story as Demeco Ryans, where, you know, you can't be that inconsistent, especially early in the year. You set the team back quite a bit with his inconsistent play. You can blame a number of things for that. You can blame, you know, building chemistry with the offensive coordinator. You can blame, you know, offensive line, issues because, you know, well, Laramie Tunsil's gone. So, of course, you're going to have some sort of offensive line issues. I get that. But there's also just aspects of his game that he just wasn't good, right? Like, against pressure, he was 16th. When the opposing defense blitzed, he was 25th out of 25. Dead last. He was not good against the blitz. He was not good at identifying when the blitz was coming. He wasn't doing great at shifting the offensive line. He wasn't great with his pre-snap analysis. He wasn't good with his post-snap analysis. He did take a step back for most of the season. When they weren't blitzing, top 10 quarterback. But that's just not the reality of what the NFL is, right? Like, when he wasn't getting pressured, he was 15th. When they weren't blitzing, he was 10th. Perfect. When they are blitzing, and when he is getting pressure, he's not nearly as good. Now, I think that there needs to be, and hopefully there has been, I think there was, especially towards the end of the season, that, again, with the inconsistency, got lost in that game against the Patriots, was having that game plan for the pre-snap adjustments. Being well studied. I think that he showed throughout the last half of the year that they actually did have a really decent game plan down the stretch. But they also seem to lack so much confidence in their passing game, and it came across like they started to really play it safe, and that's where you get him being 21st out of 26 quarterbacks in big-time throw percentage. He was 7th in turnover-worthy plays, but that coincides almost completely and correlates completely with the lack of the big-time throw percentage. And then you have the adjusted completion percentage, 24th out of 26. So there just wasn't this aggressiveness down the field. He was 19th of 21 quarterbacks in deep ball grade. He was 21st of 28 in the intermediate areas, that 11 to 19 yard range. And in the short areas, he was 10th. So when they were working that quick passing game, he was actually doing pretty well, and they were, nickel and dime him down the field. And when the play action was working, he did well, but it wasn't working all that often. He was 15th to 26, kind of smack dab in the middle there. He wasn't holding the ball too long, so it really wasn't that he was doing his offensive line a disservice. So you can blame a lot of the offensive line, but that also, you got to have those pre-snap adjustments. You got to know when to leave the running back in. You got to know where to properly direct him. What gap is his responsibility when they're having pressure? There wasn't a whole lot of that happening for Stroud. And he does seem to have, it's not that he's regressed in that area since his rookie year. He simply just hasn't developed that aspect of his game, it seems. He's been rather stagnant. Like, he's no better pre-snap than he was in week 10 of his rookie season. So how Nick Cali and him work together here, you hope for a healthy season with the weapons, because he's got a really good weapons group that we'll get to. But I feel like it mostly just comes from a preparation standpoint and how he prepares, how his coaches get him prepared. Maybe Davis Mills can do something as a good backup quarterback. The backup quarterback is basically the assistant quarterback's coach. So he's got a little experience. And frankly, when Davis Mills has played most recently, they haven't produced all that differently, which is a huge concern. So they have to do something here to get CJ Stroud developing. Because I talked about it earlier. He came in his rookie season, probably came out of that rookie season, people thinking he was about the 14th to 15th best quarterback in the league. And the fact he hasn't moved from that spot needs to be some sort of red flag. Now, is the red flag that he hit his ceiling? I argued when he came out of Ohio State that, these Ohio State quarterbacks just aren't that good. They don't have a tremendous upside. They benefit a lot from a well-constructed college program, and then they get to the pros and they just kind of, right? They don't elevate the players around them. Now, I look at comparing him, this is going to bother people, viewers of this channel, but you look at Justin Fields, who was the quarterback before him. Fields didn't really elevate anyone. It comes across when you look at the production that his weapons and whatnot have had since coming into the league, that the weapons were really what elevated him. There's really no example of anyone in the NFL that was just so much of a better player with Justin Fields than without. With CJ Stroud, there's a lot of the same with that. I would say absent of Nico Collins. Nico Collins wasn't really anything, and then him and CJ Stroud got together and they worked together. Now, what was it? Was it Stroud elevating him? Or was it everything clicking with Collins in what would have been, I believe, his third season in the league when they ended up hooking up, and helping his rookie quarterback, immediately jump up a level? there's an argument I think made for both sides there, but I think what we're going to see throughout this season, how does Jaden Higgins develop? How does Jalen Knoll develop? How does Tank Dell develop? Because, Tank Dell's been in the league a minute, but he's also been injured for about half the time. So he's, for all intents and purposes, I think like a second-year receiver at this point, because he's been injured for 2 years. So we'll see how that all works out for him, but he needs to produce. This is the year he needs to produce, because there's talks out there that there are some well-established quarterbacks in the NFL that are ready to move on, perhaps. And that there's the potential that we could see that, that Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff trade. And I think that if Stroud comes in this year and, not saying they can't be a playoff team, you're not saying he can't have a decent season, but if he doesn't produce as like a top 10 quarterback by the end of the year, is there talks of moving on from him in some way, shape, or form? I think it's at least going to be part of the conversation for Houston in the offseason. So I hope it doesn't get to that, because then you lose Nick Cali, but there's also a world where this offense plays great. CJ Stroud plays great. He loses the offensive coordinator, and then he has to start again. And I think that there's a huge fear for me for that as well. So it's a really weird spot for CJ Stroud to be in at this point in his career. I don't think this is anything of what people were expecting after that rookie season. But we'll see what he can do with what he has around him. And he's getting the 11th to 14th best weapons group. So just outside the top 10. And it's a group that very well by the end of the year could be a top 10, top 8 weapons group, because they have some established names here. You get healthy with Tank Dell and you get some development out of these other guys. You could be in a really good spot. And, we'll start with wide receiver 1. Nico Collins comes in with a 90 grade, one of the best in the league. And despite the offense's struggles last year, he still produced at a really good level. He had 71 catches on 117 targets, 1,117 yards. He had 6 touchdowns. He was second amongst 32 wide receivers in drops percentage. He was 6th in terms of contested catch. So he was going up for everything and coming down with everything. He was 12th of 40 wide receivers in the deep areas. So despite the struggles putting the ball deep down the field, when they did, Nico Collins was very successful. And then despite the struggles in the intermediate areas, he was actually graded the number 1 wide receiver of 33 eligible receivers in that 11 to 19 yard area. So of all the struggles that they had pushing the ball more than 10 yards down the field, when they did it to Nico Collins, they did it with a really high level of success. So that has to be something that they have flagged on the offensive side of the ball in those offensive meetings here throughout the summer, and figuring out ways to get that ball deep down the field to Nico Collins and use that catch radius, use that physicality that he's been able to turn into such a tremendous asset for him. He was 8th versus man coverage out of 29 eligible receivers, and he was 10th versus zone. So it didn't really matter what opposing teams were throwing at him. He was finding himself in the right position. Against man coverage, he was beating them. Against zone coverage, he was pushing the zone down the field, sitting in the right areas, turning the hips of the corners and the safeties in the right way perfectly. And there is a great chemistry between him and CJ Stroud that needs to be talked about. His career rise directly coincides with CJ Stroud's introduction into this team. So he's a hell of a talent out there. Just seems to be searching for a legitimate number 2 next to him to really just take some of the heat off, take some of the pressure off of him. And I do wonder who that can be. Will that be Jalen Higgins? Will it be Jalen Knoll? I think throwing both of those assets at him. I was really big on Jalen Higgins when he came into the league. I thought that he was a really great little option here, and landing here was a great spot for him. He had 41 catches, 525 yards last year, which for a rookie number 2, borderline number 3 most of the season with Stephon Diggs there, wide receiver, was actually decent production. You know, he again, not a lot of drops for him. So with him and Nico there as your 2 outside wide receivers, they both had 78% of their snaps, almost 80% of their snaps as outside wide receivers. So you seemingly have a really good group here to move along in the future. You know, now Higgins takes over for sure that number 2 spot with Diggs gone. And we'll see what he can produce, what he can add to this team. Because he did score 6 touchdowns last year as well. You know, 525 yards is on 41 catches is actually pretty fine. He wasn't a great contested catch guy, but Nico Collins is such an elite guy when it comes to that you can use Higgins in different ways. They're not the exact same type of wide receiver either. I'd like to see him do better against man coverage, but I think that's another thing with rookie wide receivers that we see a lot, which is why their production's usually not as high, is you got to get used to the physicality of corners in the NFL. You got to get used to that press man coverage on the outside. You even got to get used to some of the zone coverage and learning how to sit, when to sit, figuring out where those NFL windows are. And I think he did enough to show that he's somebody that should be having potential of looking up this year. I think he's got good highlights, enough good highlights to justify him being out there. He just needs to show that he's just a more consistent option for Stroud. And I want to see how they're going to scheme him up throughout the year. Same thing with Jalen Noel and Tank Dell. I think they're going to be more of the fun wide receivers. It's unclear what Tank Dell's role is going to be this year because there is the massive injuries, the lower body injuries to a guy whose lower body, not to say that any NFL player's lower body is not incredibly valuable, but for his style, for what he does best, for how he's going to beat opposing defenders, having that quick cut ability, that agility, that acceleration is so important to his game. You know, that start-stop, that quick start-stop. And if you got bad ACLs and ligaments in there, that's incredibly difficult to do. And there can be discussions about injury-prone being a thing. Very possible. But that's why they have Jalen Noel as well, because I think Jalen Noel will be doing a lot of the same things that Tank Dell would be doing. You know, in a slightly different way, but I think that becomes your slot competition. I think as Tank Dell comes back into the fold, Jalen Noel's production probably takes a bit of a dip, but to have Jalen Noel at least as an option, he's actually a pretty good depth option for a second-year player. You throw in Xavier Hutchinson, Xavier Hutchinson feels like he's a wide receiver that's been in the league for a decade. I think he's still on his rookie contract. So it's just weird how some of these younger players come across as like these grizzled veterans somehow. It's like they don't play enough, but you think they've been around. I don't know. And then they picked up Lewis Bond as a rookie. They got Justin Watson, a wide receiver from Kansas City. Be interesting to see how these guys mix in because they do have 4 really good players here. So I wonder how the depth is going to work out behind those guys and how many of these guys they're going to keep. Because we know Dalton Schultz is going to be there. One of the more consistent tight ends, you know, high floor tight ends, good receiving track record. And you got Foster Moreau as well, who has had those like blow-away seasons where it's like, oh, Foster Moreau's going to be one of the best tight ends in the league, and then he just kind of falls again behind the scenes on people. But I think as a number 2 option in an offense that will want to use 2 tight ends, I think he's as good of a number 2 tight end as you can find. And then there's the running backs, Woody Marks and David Montgomery. I do think David Montgomery kind of is established as the number 1 back on paper at least. But we'll see how they use Woody Marks. I think Montgomery's ability here in the passing game and being a pass blocker and having some good IQ in the backfield will assist a lot with what they struggled with last year, which was their quarterback against the blitz, against pressure. And having a guy with the experience of Montgomery and the skill set of Montgomery, he'll be able to help and identify where the blitz is coming from, where he needs to help, where he needs to chip, not bailing too early either, understanding the timing of it all. When you have a rookie running back there, it is hard for them to work out the timing of these delayed blitz, of the stunts and all that, and being able to identify when they're coming from, situationally when they're coming from. So I think adding a veteran like David Montgomery will definitely assist in that aspect as well. So that's sort of a underlying, undercover, really solid aspect of David Montgomery's game that's going to start to come up now. But I would like to see Woody Marks get opportunities, of course, and I think you could see a world where you talk about having a 2 tight end set. I think you can have a 2 running back set as well, just to mix and match the matchups a little bit, because David Montgomery, I think, is an underrated receiving back. So I think when you have this variety of talent and you have capable talent the way that they have, you can do a lot of fancy things. You can do a lot of exotic formations and player personnel packages to just keep defenses on their toes. And I think that's a good way for Nick Cali and to scheme up this offense to basically confuse the opposing defense with something that looks complicated, but to the offense is actually rather simplistic. I think that helps with CJ Stroud. I think that helps keep all these guys involved in different ways. It opens up what you can do in a playbook for my player play package. Like, these plays are for this player. It opens up huge opportunities for your offense, expands your playbook, but doesn't overcomplicate it in the same vein. Now, as overall running backs, they do rank 26th to 27th, because I do see David Montgomery and Woody Marks both as sort of these like high-end number 2 backs. And when you don't have like the highest ceiling for like this true, again, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor types, you lose the ceiling. But I think that having the consistency of play is going to be there. You bring in David Montgomery from Detroit, who did have number 2 running back carries last year. So the tread on his tires is actually not as high as it would be for a running back who has at least a perception of the amount of production that he's had. He had 156 carries last year, 761 yards, 4.5 yards a carry, 8 touchdowns. He had 6 explosive runs, 501 yards after contact, accounted for 41 first downs, 29 missed tackles forced, and 2 fumbles. He was the thunder to what was Jahmyr Gibbs' lightning. I wonder, Woody Marks is not exactly this Jahmyr Gibbs type player by any means, but I do like how they will potentially mix in together, because Woody Marks did struggle last year. He carried the ball 191 times, only 3.6 yards a carry, 703 yards, only 2 touchdowns, 39 first downs, 507 yards after contact. He did have a fumble. So I guess we'll just see how he comes into play here with a true veteran presence there, with a true option for him as a number 2 back to ease his way in, be put in more favorable situations. I think he was kind of thrust in there to be this number 1 running back when he just wasn't ready for it. There's a reason why he wasn't like a day 1, day 2 pick, right, in the draft. Like, the perception of his ceiling is not that high, and running behind an offensive line that wasn't all that great, he just wasn't put in a great situation. And I think he rose to the occasion better than people expected. I think that the 3.6 yards a carry paints a different picture than I think we actually saw from him last year. I will say that. So I'm not down completely on this room. I think that as the season goes on, you'd like to see Woody Marks maybe sort of take over this true running back role as a number one back from Montgomery and let Montgomery settle into being what he was in Detroit, where he did excel so much. And he wasn't this, he played as well as a number one back when he was getting opportunities. He just wasn't getting overrun and getting all the miles put on him. So I think it keeps them both fresh. It keeps the offense executing. It keeps you don't lose anything by having either one of those guys in. You might lose in the passing game, but in terms of just the running game, you're really on the exact same level here for the most part. And I think David Montgomery providing some guidance for Woody Marks, again, being that veteran in the room to show him a different way, to teach him about opposing defenses, how to attack gaps, how to trap linebackers, and all that stuff that veteran running backs in the NFL learn over time. I think he can bestow that onto Woody Marks, and hopefully he'll be susceptible, and Nick Callie will be able to figure out a nice little split here for these two guys to make sure that the running game doesn't fall so far behind that it does start to affect the passing game, because you need a strong play action game in this offense that Nick Callie wants to run. He wants to run two tight ends. He wants to have the extra lineman out there. He wants to be a run game focused coach. So if you don't have that, if you can't figure out the rotation, if you're not getting production out of your rotation, you got Jawar Jordan, Evan Hall back there. I don't expect much from them. This running game is going to live and die on these two bodies here. Then you're not playing against heavy boxes like you want, which means that you're going to be facing too high shell, which means your deep balls to Nico Collins that you want to throw just aren't going to be there. So this running back room is about so much more than just their ability to get the ball when CJ Stroud turns around and hands it off to them. Now, this is the group that really I feel needs to step up for this offense to work. And it's the offensive line. And it's cliched at this point to say, oh, the game's won in the trenches. I think what we saw from the inconsistency of this offensive line last year while they were trying to figure out their identity without Laramie Tunsil was a huge detriment. And I think it is a huge assistant in setting back CJ Stroud and setting back what you feel as an offensive play caller that you can do. And that's why they added a bunch of new bodies. This offensive line compared to what it was 2 years ago feels like it's completely turned over. So we start with Laramie Tunsil's replacement, Ariante Ursary, who, as a rookie, he looked like a rookie, man. 664 pass snaps and gave up 7 sacks. He was 53rd in pressures allowed out of 62, 41st in hurries, and 62nd of 62 in quarterback hits allowed. And we go back to CJ Stroud's pressures fault. He was 9th in pressures fault. So he wasn't exactly setting this offensive line up to fail in his defense. So I understand that it was huge shoes for Ursary to fill. Maybe slightly overdrafted because of the need. The Laramie Tunsil trade will never make sense to me. I don't know that it's ever really going to make sense to Texans fans either, if not for any other reason other than it was a cap clearing move for whatever reason. Why you would give up one of the best offensive linemen as a cap clear, whatever. But now here in the second year, Ursary needs to show that next step in development. He needs to show the resiliency, and the coaches need to establish a faith in him here. There's a huge amount of faith that needs to be put in Ursary to perform at a high level. We've seen left tackles in the NFL come in and struggle in their rookie years, and then their second year, they looked phenomenal. Immediately what comes to mind is Andrew Thomas. Granted, Andrew Thomas did not look this bad in his rookie year. So Ursary needs to have much better get off. He needs to have much better feet. He needs to not reach as much. He needs to play with more strength at the point of attack, at the ball, at the line. In both that, it needs to be so much better in the run game. Again, this offense we just talked about, this game offense wants to run the football. So he needs to step up in that aspect. He needs to be a huge performer here. They brought in Wyatt Teller, which probably about 2.5 years too late for that. Wyatt Teller does not come in as a high grade for me, but he is coming in as a starter. So you can say that about him. I like Evan Brown maybe a little bit better. I think overall they're probably just about the same. I guess it more depends on what kind of an offensive line and offense you want to have. And I think they want to be more of a running team. They want to have a better established run game. So that's why you bring Wyatt Teller as a starter over an Evan Brown, for example. And Evan Brown becomes more of your swing interior offensive lineman. We've seen him have success at center and guard as a backup in the past. And Wyatt Teller, with the experience, you're kind of hoping for the higher floor there. Then you get Keelan Rutledge in the first round. So 2 years in a row, they invest in the first round for this offensive line. Rutledge was a guard at Georgia Tech. He's going to come in and play center here from the looks of it, at least currently as it stands on their depth chart. And he had a really solid run performance in college. And he was a really decent pass blocker as well. He's like 14th in pressures allowed out of 116 interior offensive linemen. So he's coming in with a pretty good upside. Learning to play center at the pro level, converting from guard to center and going into the NFL, learning to play center in the NFL after playing guard may be a little short-sighted, and unfortunately may lead to much of the same of what we saw last year in terms of early season inconsistencies, which is why I don't love this pick. If he was playing guard, he would get much higher grades from me. So I want to throw that out there. He'd probably be more of like a 77 in pass and then like a 75 in the run game if he was playing guard. But they're moving him to center because they have guard positions established already, which fine. He did run mostly gap in Georgia Tech, so I think that is a huge reason why you bring him in if you want to run more of a gap style run game. It does suit what he was doing. It's just getting him to do that from the center position. And now you have CJ Stroud, who we just talked about, the pre-snap adjustments, pre-snap identification, pre-snap line adjustments. Not something he's developed in all that well. And now, usually when you're in that situation, you supplement that with an experienced high IQ NFL center. Now you've given him a rookie center who's learning to play center after playing guard in college. Not the best. Not the best and not giving me the warmest of expectations here. I'll say that. And it's unfortunate because, again, like as a guard, Keelan Rutledge, perfectly good player. Personally, Jake Andrews, who they have on the roster, comes in as a significantly better center option to start the year. And he's a younger player as well. So I don't understand the logic currently of them having Rutledge at center. I know you brought in Wyatt Teller to play guard, but for me, starting Jake Andrews at center and having Rutledge as your left guard, I think immediately takes your offensive lineup to be much higher than 24th to 30th in pass blocking and 20th to 26th in run blocking. So there is that aspect to it. You got Ed Ingram, though, who, again, not a great pass blocker, but as a run blocker, he's what you want on your offensive line. So there is that at least going for you there. Then you look at someone like Braden Smith, who you just signed in the offseason from the Indianapolis Colts, who for most of his career has been a very just solid, high floor, reliable starting right tackle in the NFL. Now getting this change of scenery here later in his career. I actually like this signing, though he's 76 pass, 74 run, definitely starting caliber, not some high-end right tackle signing, but somebody that definitely makes the offensive line better. And now with at least him and Ed Ingram on the right side of this offensive line, I think you get at least something to really look forward to here. And I think it's at least something that is solidified and you can establish and hang your hat on for this offensive line. He only gave up 1 sack last year on 471 snaps. right in the middle of the pack, upper half of the league in pressures allowed and stuff. So it wasn't his best run blocking year. So we'll see how he bounces back from that. Only 295 run snaps last year anyway. So not the healthiest of seasons for him. So we'll see what a healthy season can do for him. They have Trent Brown, the veteran who's hanging around there right now as sort of a swing option. And Braden Smith gives you guard flexibility as well at right tackle. So I will say, not for nothing, they've thrown a lot of assets out here where they have a lot of flexibility in terms of the combination of 5 they want to go with come week 1. Where you can have Trent Brown as your starting left tackle if Ursary just doesn't look like he's going to be able to step up to the plate. You have a world where Keelan Rutledge can go to guard and Jake Andrews can step in and play center. You have a world where Evan Brown can step in, play center or guard, and Rutledge can kick out. You have a world where Braden Smith can go and play guard and Trent Brown becomes a starter at right tackle. You do have the flexibility to raise this group up at least a little bit and truly just play your combination of 5. So I will give them credit for bringing in offensive linemen that do have this position flexibility to give you more options at the end of the day, to keep Trent Brown in the locker room, at least so far, to give you an option at either one of those tackle spots, to bring in Braden Smith to give you an option at right tackle or at one of the guard spots, to have Keelan Rutledge, if he doesn't pick up the center position all that well, you can pivot to having him at guard, and then you have Jake Andrews or Evan Brown, hopefully Jake Andrews, who have more center experience. So it's not all lost. It's just a matter of how long does it take them to find the best combination of 5 and how much inconsistency does that lead to throughout the season and have it be much of the same of what we saw last year that led to so many of the struggles this offensive line had, and in turn the struggles the offense had in correlation to that. Looking for some of the ceiling, some of the upside, it doesn't seem to really be there. Other than Keelan Rutledge, Ursary doesn't really have this great upside. He didn't really come into the league with that. Wyatt Teller's on his way down. Braden Smith is on his way down. You assume Trent Brown is on his way down. Ed Ingram, he kind of is what he is at this stage in his career. So it was a huge risk to trade Tunsil, and they've been doing their damnedest to replace that production and that protection by just throwing veteran bodies and some high-level draft assets at it. It just hasn't come out yet, and I wonder how much longer it's going to take, because it doesn't seem like it's necessarily going to be taking off immediately here. It seems like it's still a lot of mixing and matching and trying to find some sort of offensive line identity. So they do come in as my number 22 offense, tier 3 in coaching, the 16th pass offense, so right there in the middle, and the 28th run offense. Not a high upside, but we'll see what the offensive line can do. If the offensive line has a great performance in the run game, then I really like what that running back room can do. If you're not getting great offensive line play, there's only so much a running back room where David Montgomery is your best back can truly produce for you. Now we're going over to just the chef's kiss of this team, the defensive side of the ball, which has carried this team for most of last year, I would say, through a lot of their offensive struggles. But the amount of talent they have, and we're going to start with the front four, start with this defensive line. It is just magic off the edge. Absolute magic off the edge with these two guys. They really do carry this group in terms of pass rush. I spoke about earlier, there's not a lot of depth, and the interior is not necessarily made to be pass rushers. It's more of a rotation of great run defense with, riding the hot hand, I guess, in terms of who the pass rushers will be. But we got to start with Will Anderson. Better and better every year. arguably, quote unquote, a breakout season last year. You can call it. He had 13 sacks. He was third in pressures, the number one edge player in pass rush win percentage. Better than Myles Garrett, better than Aiden Hutchinson. He was first in quarterback hurries as well, 28th in quarterback hits, so he wasn't out there making all that contact with them, but he was putting the pressure on, he was finishing, he was setting up his teammates to succeed as well. He was fourth in forced fumbles, 12th in stops percentage. So, you look at some of these great pass rushers, and they're usually just great pass rushers, and then they're kind of just not interested in defending the run. He's one of the best run defending edge players in the league, coming from that Alabama mindset where you dominate in all aspects of the game. You don't half-ass it in the run. You don't just play selfish football and be a pass rusher and try to get yours. He's a tremendous pass rusher, but he plays with such a high level of discipline as well that he doesn't leave the defense in his side of the ball and his linebacker and his defensive tackle hung out to dry in the run game at all. He is incredibly good at initiating contact with an offensive lineman, keeping his eyes on the ball, and figuring out very quickly play identification very early if it's a pass or a run. And if it's a run, shedding the block and getting in the right position to funnel the run game into the linebackers, or flat out just making the tackle himself, or immediately unleashing the pass rush move, whether it be a bull rush, whether it be just beating the guy around the corner, whether it be the spin move, fakes and all that stuff. He's got a great pass rushing tool belt to go with all the high IQ plays that Will Anderson makes. And I said it in the onset, if it wasn't for Myles Garrett just being an absolute animal, Will Anderson's undisputedly probably the best edge rusher in the entire league. You pair that with what you have in Danielle Hunter, who I think people were expecting him when he came over from Minnesota to be a little washed, but talk about, again, rising to the occasion here. He had 16 sacks last season. He was 5th in total pressures, 5th in pass rush win percentage. So you had the number 1 and number 5 most successful pass rushers in terms of win percentage in the entire league on either side of the ball. How, as an offensive coach, are you supposed to prepare for that? He was 4th in hurries as well, by the way, which combines with being number 1 with Will Anderson on the other side. So they were tremendous complements to one another. It wasn't a situation where one of them was dominant and the other one was just sort of eating what the other guy was serving. It wasn't this Josh Hines-Allen, Trevon Walker situation where Josh Hines-Allen was producing such a high level. Trevon Walker didn't have a great pass rush win percentage, but was still finding a way double-digit sacks because the sack was kind of just coming to him. These guys are creating their own opportunities with not a whole lot happening on the interior, and they're doing it with these high IQ levels. Danielle Hunter is no slouch in the run game either. He was 15th out of 51 in stops percentage. He was also tied for 4th in forced fumbles with Will Anderson. He took 728 snaps, which you look at Will Anderson, he had 689. He took more snaps than Will Anderson did just a year ago. It's the best 1-2 combination that we've probably seen in a long time. This is like Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis level of pass rushing combination. And that's just one I can think off the top of my head in terms of a dominant 1-2 punch where they were both number ones. I'm sure there's another example out there of more recent times that someone can point to for me. But what a group. What a combination. Now, the issue that I have is from a pass rushing perspective, especially off the edge, they don't really have anything else. So they're kind of very heavily reliant on these two edge guys. And then you got Dylan Horton, Dominique Robinson, Solomon Byrd, which I just, Dylan Horton is barely a number 3 quality pass rusher. Dominique Robinson is barely a number 3 option as a run defender. I guess you like it as a rotational guy now and then. But I do fear what having to run these two guys into the ground can do if you don't get healthy seasons out of them. Like, you can only do it for so long before guys who play with such a high level of physicality, have to miss time. And you can say that about everyone, but not really. Because these guys do play a much more physical style of defense. It's much more demanding. There's a lot more four-man rushes. They don't want to blitz. And then what you get on the interior is just not really a whole lot of great pass rushing. You get great run stuffing interior here with Sheldon Rankins, Caden McDonald coming in as a rookie, Tommy Togiai. I really like that group. And then you throw in Logan Hall. It's a really nice group of four here that they have in terms of keeping a fresh interior defensive line rotation. Naquan Jones pretty damn good also. Naquan Jones is a number 3 on so many good defensive lines, and he's stuck here as number 5. So I think it speaks to the depth here. I think Caden McDonald does have the potential to be like a true dominant interior nose tackle. We'll see how he develops throughout the year, what kind of opportunities he gets. I think we'll see Sheldon Rankins and Tommy Togiai mostly taking over the pass rushing aspect. They'll probably be the guys that get the most snaps throughout the year. And you'll see Caden McDonald worked in a little bit there. You see Logan Hall worked in a little bit, I think, on more earlier downs. I can see Logan Hall coming out playing a little bit of defensive end perhaps in some of the early downs when you want to play a little bit bigger and you want to give one of these star edge rushers a little bit of a break, a little bit of a breather, and you want to try and just play a more physical, bigger game, then that could be a possibility. Because overall, they're 3rd in run defense for a defensive line. So it's going to be really tough to move the ball against this front 4. They're 11th to 15th in pass rush, mostly because they're dragged down by the interior and who the number 3 option is. It's just how I went about grading and trying to grade as many of these teams as fairly as possible. It does not having that number 3 edge player and not having like a higher end interior guy when some of these other teams do have that does kind of hurt them a little bit. And depth matters when you have a defensive line. So you can count on these 2 edge players dominating yet again, but if you don't get solid performances from the interior, then teams will be smart enough to work around that. Offensive coordinators in the NFL are really smart, and they'll figure out a way to just take these 2 guys out of the game as best you can if you can't get something up the middle. So we'll see how that works out here for this defensive line. But overall, like, outside of the Rams now with, again, Myles Garrett, it's tough to find a better overall defensive line here. And with the level of coaching that they're getting, like, this should be another very dominant season for this group. Now with the linebackers, they come in 23rd to 26th in pass coverage, but 7th in run defense. And so you guys know, love my linebackers with their run defense. Doesn't really matter all that much to me about their pass coverage. The run defense is what matters to me. And they got a nice combination of 3 linebackers here that they'll be able to rotate in and out. Particularly, I think Azeez Al-Shaair is your established number 1 linebacker. He plays with the attitude of an old school linebacker. He's somebody that every other fan base hates. He's got this, he's a dirty player reputation a little bit, but unless he's playing against the Giants, I really don't care. Because then I just love these old school linebacker mentalities where he's just trying to lay people the hell out. He's just physically he's slapping people around, trying to start fights, getting in people's heads. I love that type of play. Now, from a pass coverage perspective, he's a little undersized as a linebacker. So he'll find himself against tight ends and all that. He doesn't have like this top end speed to be sprinting after running backs, at least not anymore. But he was 7th in passer rating allowed. He was 18th in zone coverage, didn't do well at all in man coverage. And I'm not all that concerned about linebackers in man coverage, but when you are really bad at it, it does matter. but aggressive when the ball came in. And I think that's the story of what he is an aggressive linebacker. And that's why he gets a really good run defense grade. And that downhill linebacker play just fits what he wants to do. It fits his style. And I think he sets the tone for this defense overall. They want to play a physical, in-your-face, aggressive style, and he fits that mentality, and I think that's why he gets brought in here by Demeco Ryans and he gets kept. Then you have Henry To'oTo'o and you have EJ Speed. I feel like EJ Speed will be more of your early down guy. I think they see To'oTo'o as having some more room to grow here. But when they get into more of a traditional base 4-3 defense, that 3 linebackers, it's going to be impossible to run against this team. Really is. Because if To'oTo'o does kind of struggle, EJ Speed's a tremendous run defender. So he comes in, you pair him with Al-Shaair. Then you get Cade McDonald, like we just talked about up the middle, with Sheldon Rankins or Tommy Togiai with those 2 edge guys up. Like, how are you running against this team? It's pretty much next to impossible to run against this team. And you're not even getting terrible coverage play, like 23rd to 26th from linebackers. Linebacking coverage can be important, but most defenses can design it to be rather inconsequential. I know Demeco Ryans, coming from San Francisco where he had Fred Warner, wants to have some semblance of coverage ability from his linebackers. But if he just has to have the linebackers just play fucking downhill first, just play that downhill first style, he's completely fine with that. And that's sort of what he's been doing. And it's benefited Al-Shaair really well. And now you get AJ Speed in the mix. It's really working out for this group. They added Wade Woodaz in the draft. Don't know a whole lot about Wade Woodaz. Don't really know how he fits in here as anything other than a special teams guy with Jake Hummel. So it's really these 3 guys competing. Henry To'oTo'o, I think, is just a coaching favorite at this point. He'll be somebody they're going to keep trying to give opportunities to. His inconsistent play, though, I think will hurt him. And if he does play inconsistently, I think they'll go with the more consistent option of EJ Speed, where you kind of lose the ceiling potential, but you gain in the floor. And I think him and Al-Shaair together will be fun to watch, at least on running situations on those 2nd and shorts or 3rd and shorts when you're getting that run at them. To see that physicality, that downhill play is going to be really fun to watch. And now I present to you the very, very best defensive backs room in the entire league. They are so phenomenal in this group. 3 legitimate monsters. Top of their game, top class at the 2 outside corners, and there in your nickel with Jalen Pitre. We're going to start with Derek Stingley, who, just from a zone coverage perspective, is near flawless. He was 3rd among 74 eligible corners graded in zone coverage. He was 10th in completion percentage allowed. He was 8th in passer rating allowed. Had 4 interceptions, that was 3rd. 9 pass breakups, that was 12th. He allowed 3 touchdowns, that was 29th. But he played 900 snaps. So, targeted 65 times, only gave up 34 catches and less than 500 yards. Just incredibly sticky at the point of attack. Tremendous instincts when playing in zone in particular. You'd like to see the man coverage get a little bit better than what he gave last year. 51st, grade 51st. It wasn't, you look at the grades and how they were given out and the context of them, you kind of go, like, I guess maybe 51 was a little bit harsh based upon how the grading was done. I could have argued he would have been at least the top 35, but there was some really good man cover guys, and it was close. There's guys that are just indistinguishable from each other in certain aspects, but he stood out so much in zone, stood out incredibly well. And then you have his partner in crime, Kamari Lassiter, who coming off another great season. He was 23rd in completion percentage allowed. He was targeted 86 times. They had to throw it to somebody. Gave up 49 catches, only 538 yards. So the yards given up between him and Stingley, not all that different. Very, very close. He was 28th in forced incompletions. 4th in 4 interceptions, that was 3rd. 10 pass breakups, that was 8th. He was 17th in passer rating allowed. So for a guy that was getting targeted a lot, to have these kind of production, that's great production. Again, really good in zone. He was 11th in zone. So where this team really is going to live and die is going to be how well they play in this zone coverage. Get a great pass rush up front, play some nice zones, instinctive zones, disciplined zones, and then attack the football. And you get 8 interceptions between your 2 outside corners, which is just great considering the production you had up front from your edge players. And Lassiter's a different type of player than what you get from Stingley. They have slightly different body types and capabilities and all that. They match up differently against different types of wide receivers well. And when you have these two guys that are both number 1 quality corners in my estimation, being able to week to week, we talked about this in the coaching part, being able to week have these versatile matchups where you can play Kamari Lassiter on the right side of the field. If you want to just play them on one side of the field, you're good. If you like one matchup really in particular, you can follow the receivers around and really just throw off an offensive coordinator who might be expecting a different type of matchup for his weapons. It's such an asset. And then you throw in Jalen Petrie as your nickel. He played 486 snaps in the slot last year, gave up 0 touchdowns, was targeted 60 times, gave up 45 catches, 450 yards, so 10 yards a catch. He was the 6th graded defensive back in the slot last year, 7th in passer rating allowed. He had 6 pass breakups. That was 4th of 66 quote-unquote safeties. 4 interceptions. That was 4th out of 66 safeties. He was just a dominant force. And then you look at what he brings in the run game, the physicality that he plays with. 58 tackles, 16 assists. He sticks his head into everything. He's just almost like another downhill linebacker that comes and plays in the slot and in the box for you. And I think Demeco Ryans, just allowing him to play in this role the last 2 years now, he stepped up his game. It suits him so well. And now he just focuses on being that guy. And he goes up against the best slot receivers in the league, some of the best slot, like swing tight ends in the league. And he wins most of those battles. And it's a really tough position to play. It's really tough to be like a smaller safety type playing in the slot. Because you'll have weeks where you're going up against some lower level guys. But then you'll have weeks where you're going up against arguably one of the best receivers in the league. You get CeeDee Lamb, you get Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can even find yourself against Jamar Chase and whatnot. So you're getting a variety of different types on the outside when really your outside corners are getting much more specific archetypes than what you get when you play in the slot. And he rises to the occasion every time. When he needs to play with more finesse, he does. When he needs to play with more physicality, he does. By my estimation, overall, he got graded 6th in the slot. I think he's the best slot defensive back in the entire league. Maybe outside Derwin James, but it's really a pick 'em there depending on what you like in terms of size and physicality. And all these guys bringing a B grade in run defense. Kamari Lassiter, great physicality. The only thing Stingley lacks is that physicality on the outside. They are a tier 2 in terms of their defensive back run support. And then you look at what they have in the safety room. They added 2 safeties to this group. They added Reed Blankenship from Philadelphia, who's a decent player. He's not a high-end safety by any means, but I think him playing that deep safety role, that true free safety role, is what they needed here, especially with Petrie now completely committed to that slot box safety role. So he can go back there. He can roam a bit. He's got great athleticism. He's shown to have some pretty good ball skills. Just like to see him step up a bit more here after, a bit of a down season probably compared to what he had at his peak in Philadelphia. But 66 tackles, 14 assists. He's going to get targeted a lot more now because he's going to get those starter reps. So we'll see how he responds in pass coverage on the back end. With the pass rush that he has in front of him, I think he's going to be facing a lot less double moves. So I think it's going to be a lot more predictable from a route combination perspective, what's in front of him. So it may be easier for him to identify and allow him to play with his hair on fire a little bit more and play more aggressive style at the ball point and see if he can force some of these turnovers and trick some quarterbacks into throwing it into some deep double coverage perhaps. Then his partner, Kalen Bullock, who I really like. And then Kamari Lassiter, who's sort of a sleeper type player as well, sitting there as a 5th round pick, I believe he was, out of USC. There could be a world where they're running some 3 safety sets where Lassiter gets a little bit of, Ramsey gets a little bit of play out there. But I do like the idea of Kalen Bullock and Reed Blankenship playing sort of that 2 safety role there in that cover 2 style with Pitre there in the slot. You get Lassiter and Stingley on the outside. There is sort of a depth issue at corner as well. It's hard to sort of deny Tremont Smith and Jalen Smith are uninspiring. Truly are just, you just hope they're special teams guys. But if one of them has to play on the outside corner, it could get messy in certain aspects. You may have to play a different style with your safeties and with what you do with Jalen Pitre in those scenarios. But, they'll cross that bridge when they get to it. It's sort of the same issue that you have with the 2 edge rushers, right? You got these 2 high-end edge rushers. Hard to find a better combination. But if one of them goes down, you're in trouble because you don't really have that 3rd backup option, that replacement level starter, and they just don't have that here either. So from a ceiling perspective, the best. And I think they would still be considered a top 10 group. They would just have a severe liability on one side of the field if they were to lose one of these guys. So overall, they are my 3rd ranked defense. Tier 1 in defensive coaching, 6th in pass defense, and 4th in run defense. It really is the centerpiece of what this team is, and it's going to be the thing that drives them throughout the year the way that we've seen, and it's going to be a group that's going to be staring over at the offense with a grimace on their face again if they are not getting complimentary football from them, because they are definitely set up to do their part as well as anybody. Now we're getting over to their schedule here, and they have a .474 in their strength of schedule. It's 26th. Their Vegas over-under is 9.5 wins. Best case scenario, I got them going 13-4. Worst case scenario, 9-8. There isn't a game that they're playing this year where I go, this is a loss. They're capable of winning all of these games. Now, they won't. But if they get great offensive play and the defense plays consistent, they stay healthy in some key spots, 13 wins is a real possibility for them. If the offense stinks the way it did last year, I still think they're going to win 9. Because, you get Cincinnati, you get Dallas, you get Jacksonville, the Giants, Tennessee, Cleveland, Washington. Like, you got some really favorable matchups here. And even the teams that are considered the better teams, Buffalo, you get them at home. You get Baltimore at home, which is huge. You hate that you catch Philadelphia and Green Bay and the Chargers on the road, but you're really so close to them in terms of quality. Like, they're going to be teams that are coming up real soon. So although they're ranked better than you, they're not so significantly better than you that you couldn't catch them on the road either. So my prediction is they go 11-6. I think with the offensive line and the potential inconsistencies you're going to see early on in the year, because I don't think they're going to have the best 5 combination out there week 1, that you could see a bit of a slower start. I don't know if it's going to be as slow as last year because you do have so many winnable games out the front here. So we'll see what they end up doing here. But I I like them before the bye week to still have a very strong record. I think what comes from a negative perspective for them is after the bye week. Unlike last year, I think after the bye week, if they're not, hitting all their cues on offense, that's when the record's going to start going down, rather than what we saw last year, which is a team that was able to go on a run late in the year. They don't have the schedule that allows them to really do that this year. So from an overall rank, they're 14th. They got the 13th ranked head coach, 22nd offense, 3rd defense. Again, sky's the limit for what this team could be if they're hitting on all cylinders. You just hope that they can get there quickly and not be just an inconsistent mess. And there it is, my number 14 team, the Houston Texans, the highest graded team in the AFC South for me. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section below. Is CJ Stroud going to be able to get this thing turned around for himself, or are they going to be looking for a quarterback in the offseason? Joe Burrow. Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff type trade. Joe Burrow. I will see you guys with the next video next time. Bye.